with such skilled leadership during these very challenging times. As someone who sits home and pretty much watches the news from 7 a.m. until 2 every day, I so appreciate what you're doing. So I'm assuming that all of you know that I chair the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission. Mayor Ginther asked me to do that in March of 2018, and we delivered our report to the mayor and others in January of this year with 80 recommendations. Very, 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 very important. And I try not to say which is the most important of the recommendations, but certainly I can say that recommendation number 70. It is the one that asks the mayor to establish an independent civilian review board. And so I was asked to just share with you why we thought that was so important. Well, first and foremost, as we approached our work, we came with the idea that we wanted to take a look at what other communities were doing, and we wanted to bring best practices to our city. And in many of our major cities, this was absolutely a best practice to have an independent civilian review board. They all don't look the same, and we shared with the mayor that someone else would need to build out what that would look like. But I would say there was even a more compelling reason. We listened to our citizens, and whether they appeared before us because we did have some public hearings, or if they submitted written requests, they wanted a civilian review board. And one of the primary reasons is that they want to try to bring the community and the police, closer together. What could they do to build more trust with our police officers? And they felt that us having this board would certainly do that. So as the chair, I am thrilled that much work is being done on these recommendations, and I want to thank Mayor Andy as he leads us in this work. So Mayor Ginther, it's a pleasure to introduce you this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Janet, for all of your continued service to the people of Columbus in many different ways. Janet has broken barriers and overcome hurdles throughout her career and is still doing it with this work for the people of Columbus, so thank you. To City Council, to the City Attorney, to Alex Fisher, to Janet's colleagues on the Safety Advisory Commission, ERIN SYNK and the Civilian Review Board Planning Team, President Anna Watson, the NAACP, Stephanie Hightower, the Columbus Urban League, Christy Angel, who is with us virtually from the YWCA, and all of the people on this screen. I know we had some technical difficulties and apologize for the delay, but I thought it was important to have these faces and voices with us today. They also include Bishop Tim Clark, Mark Fluharty of the AFL-CIO, and members of the Civilian Review Board Work Group, Randall Sistrunk and LaShawn Carter from the Chiefs Advisory Panel. We have Senator Herschel Craig here as well, and Elder Larry Price. We appreciate everyone's engagement. Setting up this press conference was particularly difficult. We have so much support that we're announcing, but trying to maintain social distancing to be safe. Columbus, as Janet mentioned, is one of a handful of big cities in the U.S. that does not have the kind of civilian oversight of police that we seek and the community is calling for. Cities like New York, Boston, Nashville, Atlanta, all of them have them. Columbus residents have been calling for a review board here in Columbus, and as Janet said, the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission made a review board one of its recommendations. And in recent weeks, we have heard residents from all aspects of our community: business, community, faith leaders. Reverend Marcus Atha from North Broadway 9 Methodist Church is here with us as well. Residents say they want police reform, including more accountability. This morning, the Council President, City Attorney, and I are announcing our intention to put forth legislation to Columbus City Council next Monday to give Columbus voters the opportunity to amend the city's constitution, our charter, to establish a civilian police review board and create an inspector general for the Columbus Division of Police to conduct independent investigations into police misconduct. The charter amendment will allow Columbus voters to clearly demonstrate their desire for police reform and establish a framework for a civilian review board that has subpoena powers, the authority to conduct independent investigations, recommend disciplinary action, and that is fully staffed and funded. This charter amendment serves as a starting point for the work group that we recently seated to establish a civilian review board that works for Columbus by the end of the year. And by making it part of the charter of the city, no mayor or council in the future can diminish the powers of the review board without the approval of the people of Columbus. One of the failings of many civilian review boards across the country is the lack of support and funding over time. Some cities have long established civilian review boards but simply stopped funding them. The proposed charter amendment ensures that there will be sufficient funding to staff the board and ensure effective operations unless there's an unforeseen financial crisis and citywide budget cuts. The proposed amendment also calls for a Department of the Inspector General for the Columbus Division of Police as an independent investigatory body that will be fully funded and staffed and directed by the Civilian Police Review Board. In a few moments, you'll hear from the City Attorney, but establishing this body provides for the independent investigations Columbus residents expect. Some of the changes proposed in the charter amendment could be legally implemented without having to negotiate with the FOP. But some of the most important powers granted through the passage of the charter amendment, including the independent investigatory body or inspector general, would be subject to negotiation. We believe the passage of this charter amendment will demonstrate clear public support for police reform from the people of Columbus. And then the FOP can decide on which side they stand, with the people or against them. As I said earlier, this charter amendment proposal has been possible because of the collaboration on so many fronts. It is now my pleasure to introduce our great partner, the leader of Columbus City Council, President Shannon Hardin.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for bringing us all together. To my colleagues, to my friends, to community leaders, thank you for being here, but thank you for your unwavering support as we gather to answer the call and follow the direction of the community. We are here because folks have worked hard, but we are here because folks have demanded this day. On June 25th, my colleagues and I on City Council held a press conference to announce what we plan to do in the next month. That day, we told the public what we plan to do. We told the public when we plan to do it, and I asked that folks hold us accountable. Today, we're announcing how we will deliver on one of those projects and address civilian oversight and independent investigations. As you've heard, this charter amendment is based on the Columbus residents, or what Columbus residents on the Community Safety Advisory Commission recommended. Those volunteers donated hundreds of hours to improve trust between our community and law enforcement. And so to our chair, Janet Jackson, I say thank you for your leadership, and all those members, including Ms. ERIN SYNK, for that work and for allowing us to be here. To emphasize a couple of critical points about the charter amendment. First, this Civilian Police Review Board and the Department of the Inspector General will be independent of the Division of Police and the Department of Public Safety. It will be a separate department and have its own budget. Second, Included in this charter language are specific provisions to ensure sufficient funding for the review board and ensure that even 5, 10, or 20 years down the line, this board is protected from the whims of elected officials who might be less friendly to accountability and oversight than the elected officials standing before you today. Third, the Civilian Police Review Board will have professional staff to assist in the investigations of misconduct cases. And fourth, the board will have subpoena power to ensure that they are able to see all the documents involved in a case. Council heard loud and clear that our residents want to see change. Adding a civilian review board and an independent investigatory body to our city's constitution is a critical step to making sure that that change becomes a reality. This amendment is a strong starting point to establish that civilian review board and will allow the community to build off this foundation to shape what the board does and reflects the values of our city. Before turning the podium over to my colleague, Mr. Rob Dorans, to discuss what we've heard from residents and from national experts, I'd like to read a short quote from the late John Lewis, Across the Bridge. He said, "Freedom is not a state, it's an act. It's not some enchanted garden perched high on some distant plateau where you can finally sit and rest. Freedom is the continuous action we all must take, and each generation must do their part to create an even more fair, more just society." I have the honor of introducing my colleague, Councilmember Dorans, who will work to shepherd this piece of legislation, this charter amendment, through its passage on Monday, July 27th. Councilmember Dorans.
Thank you, Council President Hardin, Mayor Ginther, City Attorney Klein, invited guests. It's an honor to be here today to talk about this important topic. As Council President Hardin spoke about, Council last month announced a short and long-term efforts to reimagine public safety in our city. At that press conference, I committed that City Council would codify the Mayor's executive order requiring use of force incidents to be investigated by an outside independent agency. I'm proud to report that Council passed that legislation weeks ago. However, then, and I will say it again today, that legislation was a short-term measure. We need true independence when it comes to investigating complaints of misconduct within the Division of Police. Independence that the community has confidence in. Independence that the community trusts. Not simply just another law enforcement agency that looks and sounds just like the system that so many have lost faith in. We need to have this trust returned between the people and the Division of Police within our community that will benefit both our residents and our officers. City Council held a hearing that lasted nearly 5 hours last week on the topic of civilian review boards, why they're important, what they look like across the country, and how they may look like here in Columbus. In that hearing, we heard from the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission. Thank you all who are here with us today, those who are joining virtually, and for all the countless hours of work that you did to produce a report that laid a foundation for what we're talking about here today. You have my undying gratitude for that important work to have us here at this moment. We also heard from the Division of Police and national experts. The National Association for the Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement shared with us the ways that communities have established effective oversight in communities across the country that have served both the needs of the community and officers. Over 150 other cities in Ohio and across the country have worked with their communities, officers, and yes, their unions to create civilian oversight bodies. There is no reason we can't achieve the same here in Columbus. Over the past month, I received thousands of emails, letters, calls on this topic. And one of the biggest themes I know I have heard, I know Council President Hardin, the Mayor, and others have heard, is the lack of trust that folks have within the current system. It's ironic that that is one of the key principles that national experts told us we need to establish a legitimate civilian review and independent investigation body right here in Columbus. That is why it's so important for us to get this right. City Council, the mayor and the city attorney and many others have devoted countless hours over the past month working towards this charter amendment that seeks to create a fair system within our community for both our officers and for the community. Building on the advice of these national experts and the engagement with the Safety Commission and the Division of Police and the community, we believe that we have found the right foundation that is legally sound, respectful of collective bargaining rights, but is also focused on community expectation and values in order to build the legitimacy and trust that we need here in Columbus. I'm excited about where we are, and I'm excited about where we're going. And on the 27th, I'm excited to be able to show to the citizens of Columbus that, as the mayor said, we're going to allow the community to have a voice on Election Day on this important topic. With that, I'd like to turn the microphone over to my friend and colleague, City Attorney Klein.
Thank you, Councilmember Dorans, and certainly to all the wonderful people in this room who have stood here to get us to this point. Certainly grateful for those efforts. This city charter amendment will create the foundation of a permanent civilian review board. Through ordinances, once this is passed by the people of the city of Columbus, City Council will be able to add specifics as it relates to the process, expanded duties, and greater authority of the review board itself. This is the basis to build out a strong civilian review board, as Chair Jackson talked about. This will occur as the FOP contract is renegotiated and updated in the future. It's important to note that these amendments will not challenge or upend Ohio's collective bargaining laws or process, or the collective bargaining process itself. This charter amendment will provide the structure for a civilian review board that transcends the term of any mayor, any city council member, or any city attorney. It will be permanently established in our city's charter, its constitution, from this point forward upon passage by the people as a strong exclamation point about accountability and review. It will be an apparatus for improving police-community relations far into the future and work within the framework of the collective bargaining process and agreement as it grows and as it's amended to reflect community expectations in policing. I know it will be the base for long-term learning and accountability. This is just one critical step in the process of reimagining the culture of justice in the city of Columbus. We've seen that even cities with robust civilian oversight still face challenges, which is why this important step is one of many important steps the city is undertaking to improve police-community relations and promote transparency and accountability in the policing process. Our work doesn't stop here. We must continue down this path of progress for all of our reforms, big and small, that together will improve police-community relations and bring about a more just and equitable society. I'd like to introduce my good friend, the President and CEO of the Columbus Partnership, Mr. Alex Fischer.
Thank you, Attorney Klein, and thanks to everybody that is in this room together. We at the Columbus Partnership stand with our employees, literally hundreds of thousands of employees in Columbus and Central Ohio. We stand with City Hall, with our mayor, and all the members of City Hall. Candidly, we stand with the citizens of Columbus. And yes, we even stand with the rank and file police officers of our community who serve us well every single day in one of the toughest jobs that we can imagine. But surely this summer has taught us all something. I'm not afraid to tell you that racism is alive and well all over our community. It exists in our businesses. It exists in the City Hall. It exists in our neighborhood. And I believe that if we have learned nothing more this summer, is that we all have to dig deep in our hearts and in our organizations and think about how we're going to improve and how we're going to change. And to me, that's exactly what this charter amendment is about. How are we going to change? How are we going to come together as rank-and-file police officers and citizens in a new partnership? A partnership that listens to one another, respects each other, that holds each other accountable. A partnership that can exist, that can come out of all the turmoil of this summer. And as the city attorney said, this is just one step in a really long journey that all collectively we have to be in. We have to root out racism. We have to root out hate. We've got to bring fairness to all aspects of our community. And we are very proud to stand with our community in this very important step to bring fairness and a new partnership in how we think about keeping one another safe, how we hold each other accountable, how we bring police and the community together, not divided. And so, Mayor, City Council President, and all of our leaders, we appreciate your leadership, and we stand very proudly to ensure this is an important step to a future Columbus that we can all be very proud of. It's now my opportunity to introduce ERIN SYNK. ERIN's been a leader in civilian review policing council and looking at these issues. And ERIN, thank you for your citizen leadership on these issues.
Thank you. So the Safety Commission repeatedly heard, as Chair Jackson mentioned, from the public during our forums and other engagement and hearings that a civilian review board was a critical piece of rebuilding trust and legitimacy here in Columbus. And so we recommended that that happen and that we do it through a process of community engagement with important stakeholders across the city. So a charter amendment lays the groundwork for the working group recommendations, establishing the authority of the Oversight Board for the Division of Police. And this is really just a first step in this charter amendment toward establishing a civilian review board and demonstrating that there is clear support from the voters and the citizens of Columbus for this board. You know, over the next several months, our working group is going to work to establish the form and function and further definition, the investigation and review powers, and we're going to do so using stakeholder and community feedback to ensure that this board meets the needs of Columbus, that it works toward rebuilding trust and legitimacy where it may be shaken, and really form that new relationship we've heard discussed where there is increased transparency, respect, and engagement with one another. I want to thank Mayor Ginther, City Council, City Attorney for your ongoing focus and attention on these important issues. I also want to thank Chair Jackson, my fellow safety commissioners. This is an incredibly dedicated and thoughtful group of individuals. We really took our time to try and bring forward these recommendations to move our city in a positive direction. And I look forward to working with an equally talented group of people in the Civilian Review Board Working Group to bring forward the review board that will work for us here in Columbus. And so with that, I would like to introduce Neana Watson, President of the NAACP.
Thank you, Mayor. On June 30th, 2020, the Columbus branch of the NAACP held a press conference in which we called for a citizens review board with subpoena power. Mayor Ginther heard our call along with other organizations. He received feedback on the citizens review board from the community. The community was concerned about the length of time it would take to establish a citizens review board. This amendment to our city charter is both a positive and an aggressive approach to the citizens review board. The amendment will further assist the Citizen Review Working Group to begin to set a foundation for the Citizens Review Board. Our community has a direct opportunity to make our voices heard at the ballot box on the proposed amendment to our city charter. Your NAACP would be remiss if we did not encourage you to make sure you are registered to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, President. We are grateful to have you with us here today and for all the work of the NAACP. Most of the speakers will stick around. I know Reverend Atha, Senator Craig, Elder Price as well for any one-on-ones, but I'd be happy to take a few questions from the press for me or the other speakers. Yes, Beth.
Mayor, a couple quick clarifications. Will this go on the November ballot or
yes.
special election? Okay. And then you say you want legitimacy as a partnership between the city, the community, and the police department. How do you expect legitimacy and acceptance from the rank and file when they're not being given a seat at the table in the working group? How do you expect them to accept this, regardless of what the union does?
Well, as you know, law enforcement is represented on the working group with retired Sergeant Anthony Wilson, who served honorably in the Columbus Division of Police and the Westerville Division of Police. There also is a retired member of the Division of Police that is part of the advisory group as well. I think it's the Professor Franklin, is that right, Robin? John McCombs is also a retired officer as well. So that perspective will be heard, and we look forward to working with them to make sure that we come up with a civilian review board that works for Columbus. Tom.
Mayor, what's your confidence level that this would pass? Has there been any internal polling done? Is this just kind of based on the current climate that you think this is going to pass?
I think the people of Columbus have been speaking loudly and clearly about change and reform. And ultimately, I trust the people of Columbus. Yes?
How much do you suspect this will cost?
What this will cost? What specifically are you talking about?
So you're saying you want an amendment so we can set up a budget for a separate, complete office, unit, inspector general. How much will this cost the taxpayers?
Well, obviously, that'll be informed by the advisory, the working group that is looking at best practices from around the country. We think it's important that this is fully funded, both the Civilian Review Board and the Inspector General role and oversight and the investigatory powers that we believe they need. So we'll know more about that once the working group gets back and makes recommendations on the details.
Where would that money come from?
Obviously, the city budget. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, who would they report to? What budget would it come out of?
I think, you know, we'll continue to work with the working group on how that plays out. My guess is it would either be out of, you know, probably the general fund budget and maybe under the Department of Public Safety, independently of the Division of Police. Yes?
You mentioned today that you're going to look at what other communities have done with their civilian review boards to see what works and what doesn't work. So far,
the working group will do that. Yes.
Have you personally seen some things that have not worked with civilian review groups?
Well, as I mentioned, in general, sometimes what's happened in communities that have had them for a long period of time is the funding, the priority, the resources, but also the talent, the folks that serve on those boards. You know, we've got to make sure that we have the very best and brightest serving on this board, that they, you know, the Inspector General and the investigator powers are properly resourced and funded so they're able to do the work that the people of Columbus are going to charge them to do. So I'm not going to cast judgment yet. That's why we formed this working group to look at models from around the country. But what I've seen is that some have not worked as well when they haven't been properly resourced, either with financial resources or human resources. Somebody else had a question. Tom Lacey, jump ball.
Mayor, more on this Inspector General position, assuming that's an appointed position, it's appointed by whom?
Civilian Review Board. The board will appoint them.
They would appoint it. Do you have requirements, or is that how to be worked out?
Yeah, those will be more of the details that come out from the working group recommendations. You know, terms, how many members, all those types of things. You know, what this really is the framework and puts in the hands of the people the ability to choose a civilian review board as a path as one of many reforms that Chair Jackson and the Safety Advisory Commission recommended. The Matrix report recommendations that Chief Quinlan is actively working to implement. This is one of many things, but a critically important thing that we believe the people of Columbus should have a direct role and participate in.
And you said the board would appoint that inspector general.
That's correct. You have any?
It's outlined in the proposed amendment.
Yeah.
The process is outlined in the proposed amendment.
Just want to make sure you all have a copy of that. Lacey, were you next?
Yeah, have you looked at other organizations in the area, like the Sheriff's Office, that already has an advisory council? They didn't have to go to the lengths of changing any charters. They haven't had to spend the funding to do that, but they have that direct feedback. I talked with Sheriff Baldwin, and he said it's been immensely helpful to have those citizens and have their ear to be able to make some of the changes that they've needed.
I believe the sheriff, and that's worked well for his department. We have, as you know, a Chiefs Advisory Council that's already been named. We have this Civilian Review Board Advisory Group. We think it's critically important to have the oversight, accountability, and transparency that the people of Columbus are demanding, that we also have a Civilian Review Board and the Inspector General role.
Do you think it would be helpful to, in this amendment that you're going to put on the November ballot, to have more of the specifics so that voters have a better idea of what they're actually going to vote on, who's going to pick the people on the group, who's going to pick the Inspector General, how people can apply and get on to be a part of that process?
We think there's enough detail at this point, and I trust the people of Columbus to know exactly what they're voting on. It's outlined in the proposal here. But we think it's also critically important that this working group that we've named to really delve into best practices and look at what's worked in other places and hasn't, and bring forth more detailed, recommendations that we can implement once the people of Columbus have weighed in on the Civilian Review Board. Yes, Bethany.
So, from what I'm hearing you say, the working group is going to be working on developing those recommendations prior to November and releasing some of that information to the public prior to the November election. Is that accurate? Yeah,
their work will start right away, and they'll be meeting and guided by a facilitator that's going to help them determine research best practices. My guess is they'll be in constant communication with the city attorney, city council, and myself about what they're finding, and then ultimately, if the people of Columbus support this charter amendment, then we will go ahead with their more detailed recommendations on seating that Civilian Review Board by the end of the year, as I've talked about before. Yes?
So you said you want it independent from the police department, the Civilian Review Board, and the Inspector General. Will it also be independent from your office?
Yes. It's all outlined at the statement. We'll make sure you guys have all that. But I'll ask folks to stick around, if you'd be so gracious, for a few minutes if the press have any follow-up questions. But appreciate everybody being here today.